The prairie stretched endlessly, a barren, unforgiving land that swallowed men whole. The sun hung heavy over the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the cracked earth. The ground was dry, its cracks deep enough to swallow even the most desperate hopes. It wasn't just the land that was parched. It was the very spirit of those who lived on it, drained by the relentless heat and hunger. And on this day, a young girl named June Blake, no older than 12, stood in front of a lonely ranch house, her feet bare against the burning ground. She had no choice but to knock. In her arms, her baby sister Rose was swaddled in a feed sack, the only thing between her and the harsh world they were born into. June's hands trembled as she lifted them to knock, each rap on the door sounding like a thunderclap in the quiet of the prairie. Her voice broke the silence with a simple, urgent plea. "Sir, before the sun dies, he'll be after us." There was a rawness in her tone, a weight in the words that suggested something more than just a desperate cry for help. It was a warning, a foretelling of the storm that was about to tear through the lives of everyone involved. June knew what her father, Harlan Blake, was capable of. He wasn't a man who was easily deterred, especially when driven by rage. And after what had happened to her mother, June knew he wouldn't stop until he found them. As she spoke, the wind kicked up, sending dust swirling around her, making it harder to breathe. A hawk circled high above, its wings cutting through the still sky like a blade. The scene was eerily silent, save for the faint creaking of the ranch gate that barely held itself together. June's eyes were wide, her gaze intense as she locked eyes with the rancher who answered the door. This wasn't just another Wild West story of survival. This was a girl who, against all odds, would change the way an entire town saw justice. But that would come later. For now, it was just June, a girl forced into adulthood before her time, trying to save herself and her sister from the violence that had torn her world apart. Quick B-roll shots flash across the screen, cracked earth, a lonely hawk circling, and the ranch gate creaking in the wind. The camera zooms in on June's face as she waits, heart pounding, unsure of what would happen next. Would this rancher, this stranger, help her, or would he turn her away? The night was still and heavy, the kind of night where every sound felt like a reminder of the pain that had just occurred. June worked quietly under the faint glow of the moon, her small hands covered in dirt. She dug with a sense of urgency, each shovelful of earth a desperate attempt to erase the horror that had taken place earlier that day. Her mother's body lay wrapped in a quilt, torn and stained by the violence of her father's rage. June's father, Harlan, had killed her mother. It wasn't the first time his anger had turned violent, but this time it was different. This time there would be no more hiding, no more pretending everything was fine. June had watched as her father's fists tore into her mother's body, watched as life drained from the woman who had once whispered lullabies to her and promised her a better life. As June continued to dig, tears mixed with the dirt on her cheeks. She wasn't just burying her mother, she was burying the last shred of innocence she had left. The girl who had once dreamed of growing up and becoming something more was gone, replaced by a woman who would do anything to protect her sister. She had no choice but to survive, and that meant burying the past. Suddenly, the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted her thoughts. June froze, her heart racing. Who could it be? Had her father found her already? She turned quickly, her eyes scanning the darkness. A figure appeared out of the shadows. Dr. Mary Ann Coulter, an itinerant frontier surgeon whose presence was as unexpected as it was welcome. Dr. Coulter had been passing through the area when she had noticed the fresh grave, the disturbed earth. She had seen this kind of thing before, the aftermath of violence, the scars it left behind. Without a word, she approached June, her eyes soft with understanding. "What are you doing, child?" Dr. Coulter asked, her voice calm yet filled with quiet concern. "I'm burying her," June said, her voice thick with emotion. "I have to bury her." Dr. Coulter nodded, her gaze never leaving June. "You don't have to do this alone," she said quietly. But June didn't want anyone's help. She didn't want anyone to see the horrors she had lived through. But Dr. Coulter wasn't going anywhere. She had seen enough pain in her life to recognize the need for justice, and she made a silent vow to be June's witness, to ensure that her mother's death would not be forgotten. With a final glance at the grave, Dr. Coulter turned and followed June's tracks, her footsteps as silent as the night. A rancher's ghosts. Micah Graves's ranch was a place haunted by memories. The once vibrant home now stood in silence, its walls adorned with the relics of a life that had been lost. A carved cradle sat in the corner of the room, collecting dust. Baby shoes, no longer worn, lay on the mantel, reminders of a family that had once been whole. Micah Graves had known love once, but it had been stolen from him by the same land that now threatened to swallow him whole. When June arrived at his doorstep, asking for shelter, Micah didn't hesitate. "One night," he said gruffly, his voice betraying the weight of his past, "I can shelter you for one night." June didn't question him. She had learned long ago to accept what was offered. Her only concern was her sister. Rose needed safety. She needed a chance. And Micah's ranch, though steeped in its own ghosts, was the only refuge they had. As the night wore on, Micah stood over the freshly dug grave of June's mother. The sorrow he felt was palpable. He had buried many people in his time, but this one was different. This was a woman who had been taken from the world too soon, a mother who had given her life for a future that would never come. Micah's hands trembled as he placed the last handful of dirt over the grave. He wasn't just burying a woman, he was burying hope. Hope that the world could be better. Hope that justice could be served. But as he stood there, he made a vow. June and Rose would have the protection they needed. He would do whatever it took to make sure that their lives didn't end like her mother's had. The land may have stolen everything from him, but Micah Graves still had his word. Gossip, guns, and a deputy. The town of Willow Creek was a small, tight-knit place where everyone knew everyone else's business. Gossip spread like wildfire here, and soon enough, word of June and Rose's arrival at Micah Graves's ranch had become the latest topic of conversation. Widow Adele Dobbs, a woman whose sharp tongue was matched only by her sharp eyes, fanned the flames of the rumor mill. She whispered to anyone who would listen that Micah had stolen the girls, that he had taken them for some unknown purpose. Her words rang with a certain bitterness, as if she herself had an axe to grind. No one knew for sure what was behind her animosity toward Micah, but that didn't stop her from stirring up trouble. Soon others began to echo her sentiments, and what started as a whisper turned into an accusation that couldn't be ignored. Meanwhile, Deputy Ethan Pike, the young and ambitious protege of Sheriff Keller, saw an opportunity in the gossip. He wasn't the brightest man in town, but he understood that a quick arrest could make him the hero of the day, the one who saved the girls from a rancher with a murky past. Pike had always been eager to prove himself, and arresting Micah would certainly earn him the reputation he craved. But there was more at play than just idle gossip. Out in the dry hills surrounding the town, a group of ranchers and rustlers, hungry and desperate for money, had begun selling horses to June's father, Harlan Blake. He had made a deal with these men, promising them safe passage back into the town in exchange for their loyalty. They saw this as a way to get Harlan back in power, back to reclaiming his land and his daughters. Harlan Blake wasn't a man to be trifled with, and his money spoke louder than any of the town's moral arguments. Soon, Micah found himself caught between the whispers of town gossip and the dangerous men lurking outside. The town was divided, unsure of who to trust or who was really on the right side of justice. Quilt of secrets. The discovery came in the most unexpected way. June had been sorting through her mother's belongings when her fingers brushed against the corner of the quilt that had once wrapped around her as a child. It was stained with blood, a reminder of her mother's final, brutal moments. But what she found hidden in the quilt's folds would change everything. A deed, a faded, crumbling piece of paper that had slipped between the stitches of her mother's quilt. The land deed. The same deed that had been the source of so much pain and anger in their lives. June stared at the paper, her heart pounding. It was the key to everything. Why her father had been so furious, why he had turned on them so violently. Harlan had gambled away their homestead to a local cattle baron. He had lost it all in a game of chance, and when the reality of his failure set in, his rage had turned toward June's mother, a woman who had borne him children, who had given everything to him, only to be discarded when he could no longer provide. June's chest tightened with anger. She had always known her father's temper, but now she understood the root of it. It wasn't just about a daughter, it was about pride, about losing something that he had once thought was his by right. And now he had turned that fury on them, threatening their very survival. But June wasn't just going to let him win. The deed was her weapon, her ace in the hole. It was proof that her father's rage had a deeper, more destructive cause, and she wasn't going to let him tear her family apart without a fight. Dr. Coulter had seen enough to know that June's mother had died from a preventable hemorrhage, not from some mystical force as her father had claimed. The truth was on their side. The medical testimony, the deed, and June's unshakable determination would turn the tide. With each passing day, June's resolve grew stronger. She knew that the town would have to choose a side, and when the time came, they would see the truth. Her mother's death wouldn't be in vain. Storm cellar confrontations. The storm rolled in with a fury that seemed to mirror the chaos in the town. The desert thunder shook the air, and lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the world in stark white light. It was the kind of storm that made the world feel alive, as if nature itself were holding its breath in anticipation. In the barn loft, Sheriff Keller called for a hearing. The townsfolk had gathered, the tension thick in the air. It was a time of reckoning, and everyone knew it. The question was, whose side would the town take? Adele Dobbs was the first to speak, presenting a forged affidavit that claimed Micah Graves had taken the girls under false pretenses. She painted a picture of a rancher who had stolen 2 defenseless children from their father. But June wasn't about to let that lie stand. She stepped forward, her hands shaking as she presented the land deed, Dr. Coulter's testimony, and Micah's signed guardianship request. The room fell silent. The townsfolk who had once been so quick to believe the rumors now had to face the truth. June wasn't just a victim. She was a fighter, and she had the proof to back it up. But Deputy Pike wasn't convinced. He had long been loyal to Sheriff Keller, but his own ambition was a powerful thing. The sheriff had made promises to Harlan Blake. If Pike sided with the girl, he risked losing everything he had worked for. If he sided with Harlan, however, he could keep climbing the ladder of success. The decision was a hard one, but Pike had a choice to make. And in that moment, he chose justice. He didn't draw his weapon against June's family. He stepped forward and made a moral decision. He shot the pistol from Harlan's hand, refusing to be swayed by money or ambition. The town was split, but the scales of justice had begun to tip. The night sky above was dark, save for the light of a comet streaking across the heavens. It was a sign, some said. Others thought it was just nature's way of marking the beginning of something bigger. Under the glow of the comet, Harlan Blake arrived at Micah Graves's ranch. He wasn't alone. 3 hired drifters flanked him, their eyes cold and calculating. The dust swirled around them like ghosts, masking the danger they brought. Micah didn't flinch. He was hammering fence posts into the ground, creating a barricade to protect what he had fought for. He wasn't about to let Harlan tear it all down, not without a fight. June, holding a lantern high in the air, stepped into the center of the conflict. The wind howled and the dust made it hard to see, but the light from the lantern cut through the darkness, forcing everyone to reveal their faces. For a moment, everything froze. The world seemed to hold its breath. Harlan Blake, his face twisted with rage, was the first to make a move. But before he could draw, Deputy Pike did the unthinkable. He aimed his gun and shot the pistol from Harlan's hand. It was a moment of reckoning, a moment when Pike chose to stand on the side of right. The Broken Saddle Trial. Dawn broke over the horizon, bathing the town in soft golden light as the people of Willow Creek gathered for the trial. The air was still, heavy with anticipation. The barn loft had been transformed into a makeshift courtroom, its wooden beams creaking under the weight of the people who had come to witness the reckoning. June stood at the center, her feet bare against the rough floorboards. Her baby sister Rose nestled in her arms. She was no longer the frightened girl who had come knocking on Micah's door. In the months that had passed, June had transformed, hardened by loss, tempered by grief, but unyielding in her determination to see justice done. The crowd had gathered, murmuring among themselves, their eyes fixed on June. She could feel the weight of their gaze, but she didn't falter. This was her moment, the moment when the truth would finally come to light. Sheriff Keller stood at the front, his badge gleaming under the harsh sunlight that streamed through the barn's open windows. He cleared his throat, signaling that the trial was about to begin. But before he could speak, Harlan Blake, shackled and bruised from his confrontation with Micah and the deputy, raised his voice. "You'll never take my girls from me," Harlan spat, his eyes wild with fury. "She's the one who killed your mother." He pointed a trembling finger at June, his voice filled with venom. "It's her fault. She killed her mother, and now she's trying to take what's mine." The crowd fell silent. It was the last desperate plea of a man who had nothing left to lose, a man who had turned his fury into a weapon against everyone he could reach. But June wasn't afraid. She knew the truth, and now it was her turn to tell it. With a steady voice, June began to speak. "My mother died because my father didn't care about her. He didn't care about any of us. He wanted me dead too, just like he wanted her dead." Her voice cracked with emotion, but she didn't stop. She died because he didn't want another daughter. He wanted a son. The townspeople listened, their eyes wide as June's words cut through the air like a blade. Dr. Coulter, standing by June's side, nodded in silent agreement. She had witnessed the wounds that had taken June's mother's life. Wounds that could have been prevented with proper care. And now she was here to testify. Dr. Coulter stepped forward, her voice calm and authoritative as she addressed the crowd. "I've seen this kind of injury before. It wasn't the result of some supernatural curse, as Mr. Blake would have you believe. It was a preventable hemorrhage, caused by a lack of proper medical care. This woman died because no one cared enough to help her." Sheriff Keller nodded slowly, turning to the gathered crowd. The weight of Dr. Coulter's words hung in the air, and for the first time, the people of Willow Creek saw the truth. June's mother had been a victim of a system that had failed her, a victim of a man who saw her as nothing more than an object to be discarded when she no longer served his needs. June's voice rang out once more, steady and unwavering. "My mother didn't deserve to die like that. No one deserves to live in fear like we did. But I'm here now, and I won't let him take my sister too." With that, Sheriff Keller stood and addressed the town. "Harlan Blake, you are unfit to be a father. Your actions have shown that you are incapable of caring for your children. You will be arrested, and the girls will be placed under the guardianship of Micah Graves." The crowd, once divided, now stood united in their decision. There were no more murmurs of doubt. Justice had been served. What offenses for? The days following the trial were filled with both relief and rebuilding. Micah Graves's ranch, once a place of sorrow and loss, was beginning to transform. The land, though dry and cracked, seemed to welcome the efforts of those who worked it with care. The fence that had once been broken and forgotten was now being repaired piece by piece, as if the very earth itself was stitching itself back together. Micah worked alongside June, Caleb, his young ranch hand, and even Deputy Pike, who had found redemption in his choice to stand with the girls. The work was grueling, but it was also a symbol of the new life they were all building. Micah hammered nails into the wood with a steady hand, his eyes focused, but there was a quiet smile on his face. June, her hands calloused and her spirit unbroken, worked beside him, guiding the pieces of the fence into place. It was more than just a physical structure. It was a symbol of resilience, of the strength that had been forged in the fire of hardship. With every nail driven into the wood, they were building something that would last, a future, a family, and a place to call home. Caleb, the young ranch hand, was carving a small wooden rattle for Rose. The girls' laughter filled the air, light and carefree, a sound that had once seemed impossible on this land. She toddled around the yard, her tiny feet patting the earth, unaware of the weight that had once been on her shoulders. Deputy Pike, standing nearby, watched the scene unfold. He approached June, who was busy hammering in the last piece of the fence. "Here," he said, holding out a small, folded piece of paper. It was the land deed, Harlan Blake's land, returned to June. "It's yours," Pike said quietly. "Start over. You've earned it." June took the deed, her fingers brushing against the paper that symbolized not just land, but freedom. The freedom to live, to build, to create something new. "Thank you," she said, her voice full of gratitude. As she stood there holding the deed, she felt something shift inside of her. For the first time in a long while, she felt like the weight of the world had been lifted, if only for a moment. There was no more running, no more hiding. The future was hers to shape. Adele Dobbs, who had once been quick to judge, now stood at the edge of the ranch gate, watching. She had a single white carnation in her hand, which she placed gently on the ground. It was her way of offering peace, of acknowledging that, despite the harshness of the past, there was room for growth, for healing. And as she turned and walked away, June knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but it would be hers to walk. Second bloom sunset. 6 months later, the prairie had begun to show signs of life. The once barren land was now dotted with green shoots, small flowers that bloomed against all odds. It was a second bloom, just like Mama had always said, life finding a way, even in the harshest of conditions. June stood by the fence watching Rose as she toddled across the grass. The little girl bent down to pick a daisy, her tiny hands clutching it with a sense of wonder. June smiled softly, her heart swelling with love for her sister. She had promised her mother she would protect her, and now, for the first time, she felt like she had truly kept that promise. Voiceover. Mama called her second bloom. Turns out she was mine, too. Micah, Caleb, and Dr. Coulter rode up on horseback, the wind kicking up behind them as they made their way to the grave where June's mother lay. It was a quiet moment of reflection, a moment to honor the woman who had given everything for her family. Together they knelt, planting prairie grass over the grave, a symbol of life, of renewal, and of the love that had never truly died. As they worked together, June's heart felt lighter, The scars of the past would never fully fade, but they were being covered over with something new, something beautiful. The land, once scarred by violence, was now healing, and so were they. Micah looked at June, his eyes filled with quiet pride. "You've done good, June. You've made this place your own." June smiled, looking around at the land she had fought so hard to protect. The sun was setting behind them, casting long shadows over the horizon. It was a second bloom, a new beginning, and as the prairie bloomed around her, so too did her heart. The past was behind them now. It was time to look ahead, to the future they would build together. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, June knew that the fight was worth it, that the family she had fought to protect had finally found their place.